afternoon. We're so excited about this, Nicole, to find out what planning and development is doing. So this will be a good afternoon for us to learn some stuff, huh?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. We're glad to have this time to speak with you today, and happy Valentine's Day. And and so I was just kind of joking with Tony Grinberg back here. The last time I was in front of you was in 2019 when I did a brown bag presentation on behalf of the department after I just finished my first year as the director of planning. And so hopefully you can pick up some of those work plan items and get back to work. Today it's meant to be somewhat informal. I know you're sitting up on the dais, but I hope we can have some conversation or stop me if you have questions along the way. It's not really a canned presentation per se. And wanted to kind of summarize our work from 2020 and 21. There's a bit of a whirlwind there last couple years. Update you on the organization and our reminder for the public, in particular, our primary functions as a department. And then where I'm really hoping to have your input on is prioritizing our work activities for 22 and 23. And so last time I was in front of you was in 2019 when I was talking about the department as a whole. I've been in front of you several times, obviously at City Commission and on various topics, but to talk about our organization and the work at hand. So when we left in 2019, we had just finished the first year, and we were heading into 2020. This is a reminder of where we were. Some of the next steps we were talking about is modernizing our boards and commissions, managing our time and priorities and this is not meant to be negative at all based on the previous round of the department, but in 2019 you started granting us planning services dollars. We went from 60 grand to about 300,000, and so it's a big change, and that allowed us to kick off the core neighborhood plan and the land development code diagnostic and really set up our long-range planning division. In 2020, it's hard to believe, in February, we had just had the federal representatives. It was the first time ever in Section 8 that we had HUD, the DOT, the Economic Development Business, and really to talk about opportunity zones, riverfront development activities. And they convened in Fargo, and we had a 2-day summit then. And then our primary focus that we're doubling down on is really the state of where our HUD activities were and the need for a workout plan, and in the process of starting our 5-year plan update. So that's where we were in 2019, and we'll pick up from there. So a bit of who we are today, and we still have the 4 divisions: long-range planning, which is vacant as a coordinator. We have our community development, who's led by Tia. We have our current planning, who's led by Donald, and our urban development, who's led by Megan. And one thing to think about is about a fourth of our work is laid out in a strategic mindset, and the rest of our work is towards implementation. We have 16 members on staff, and back in 2019, our average tenure was about 6 years. And when I did the math, we're still at about 6 years. And so an important note for 2021 is we lost about a third of our staff due to life transitions. And so we have, Mark and I have been primarily focusing at the end of last year and the start of this year on getting those positions filled, interviewed, and selected. And like everybody in the country, it's a challenge, but we hope we're going to be successful here by the end of March. So one of the things I wanted to be conscientious about is when I started as director, I made it pretty clear to Bruce and my leaders at the time that this is a strategic plan as we move to evolve the planning department. And at the time, we were doing lots of activities trying to basically be everything for everyone and trying to prioritize. We were getting thinner and thinner as a resource, and so we knew we needed to get some big tasks done. And so there was a bit of, what are we doing and why? Who is our audience? What is our goal? And how do we adapt, change, and incorporate transparency? In 2020, obviously we had the pandemic, and so it happened to coincide. We are just finishing up our 5-year plan outreach for the HUD program. And so we had a good handle of what our community needs were based on that outreach. And then really what problems we're trying to solve, what is our role, and who are our partners. And so that was a lot of our emphasis of our work in 2020, 21. And as we go into 22 and 23, and there's obviously not a clean break between each of these years, but understanding what we further need for resources. And really, anyone I've been talking to, it's about time to start making decisions as we proceed and implement some of the plans and strategies that we've been talking about as a community. And then making sure that we get that feedback and seeing if we need to pivot. One of the things I believe in is that we're in a state of constant transition. As much as I hate change, I have to continually remind myself that we're constantly transitioning as a society, and that impacts everything we do. So in 2019, this is a bit of how we were as a department when I came on as planning director and Mark came on as assistant director. Is as we tracked our time, we spent a portion in the HUD work, a portion in permits, programs, customer service, and projects. One of the challenges is the programs and the projects weren't necessarily strategically aligned with the work we were trying to do on a daily basis. Now, as we go into 22, we spend our time more in the categories of land use, both long-range and current planning, and then the HUD housing work. We still have projects and we still have programs. And this isn't to say customer service isn't a focus, but of course, the idea is that we all have a same understanding of what customer service is. And so I can talk a little bit about the change between 2019 and today is...
Nicole, can I ask a question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Back up one. So are the permits under the land use on this
Yes,
one? Okay.
yes, thank you. Yes, absolutely. And so what's changed since then is, and please just interrupt me. I tend to start talking and getting on a roll. So in terms of what changed, really in terms of the community development HUD work, community response, understanding the 5-year plan adoption, focusing on our strategies, and really operationalizing more of the programs. So as an example, when you think about downtown activities, go way back to 1999, 2000, and you had Bob Stein and the Renaissance Zone as a priority, and all things downtown were, besides the leaders in our community, were one staff person. Now we have Public Works, engineering, the police department, the DCP, so many entities that have working on downtown issues integrated in their day-to-day priorities and have ownership on those issues. So that's what I mean by operationalizing programs. Parking is another way. We have interstate parking. We don't necessarily have internal staff management as deep. And so those are the kinds of things that we work towards. So I was going to pause on this a little bit. And as we try to streamline and our focus moving forward, one of the things the staff ask me is for more clarity in the day-to-day priorities. And so one of the things I want to start to lay out is we spent some time with a consultant to help us with our hiring process. And one of the business organizational mindsets is, what are you accountable? Being able to have the elevator speech of what is the planning department accountable for? And I want to say we're funded, probably 80% funded to do these 4 things in terms of creating the HUD 5-year plan, and then annually there's a 1-year plan. And I'd be glad to talk to more about that, but it's really just focused on how we're spending the federal dollars, spending and providing oversight of those HUD funds, and the intake and the guiding of the land development applications, that you see on Monday nights and the process to get there, and then create and manage that comprehensive land use plans. And that fourth element is somewhat new since you've allocated those funds in the planning services dollars. But this is what our primary focus is. I would say 80% is our fundamental, and for language, I use housing and land use. So when projects or ideas or proposals come to us, my first question at the staff level is, how does it relate to our housing strategies? How does it relate to our land use strategies? And if it doesn't fit in that box, I ask for a pause and we talk further. And so I was going to focus on these four things in a little bit more detail and how we're migrating to these priorities. Any questions before I dive in? So a little bit of 2022 priorities for community development. I keep saying HUD, and as opposed to social service funds, right? And so, really what are we trying to do with the federal dollars? We're trying to connect the needs with activities, needs of our community with the direct activities. So the recent work, Friday there was a big celebration with After School Matters. That's an example, right? We had very little to do with what her organizational plan is, what the operations are, but we had everything to do with how those construction improvements happened. And it pretty much took 1.5 full-time staff members to get that grant money out the door, to oversee how the receipts and the payments and everything works with the contractors. And so it really becomes almost construction project management. The primary strategy I'd like to keep focusing on, that we're starting to shift the Community Development Committee on, is linking the gaps in the housing continuum. And basically we have a strong group of people that are working on homeless solutions. We have a strong group of people that are working on prevention and diversion. We're having a strong group of people working on affordable housing or subsidized housing, but there's big gaps between those groups of people. That's where our office syncs up the funds and the resources. Some of our accomplishments that I wanted to touch on quickly on community development over the last couple of years is every 5 years we do a major community outreach, surveys, things like that to understand what the needs are. We did this about 2 years ago. We're about halfway through our 5-year plan, and really housing and homelessness came out as the primary need. Over the last couple of years, we've withstood 3 federal audits over the last year and came out with some findings, but nothing astronomical or catastrophic. And we're well on our way to having 5 excellent trained staff on our team that know how to implement HUD federal regulations. And if you haven't worked with HUD federal regulations, they are the worst when it comes to oversight and monitoring. It's the hardest agency to work with. EPA is pretty close, but HUD is the worst. In terms of what was new for our department, they had 6 times the funding resources than we normally have on a year. And that was because of the COVID, all the different COVID funds that came out through Treasury related to HUD. There's COVID Treasury dollars that came direct to the city, that came, went to the DOT, that went to transit, but there were 3 rounds, if not 4, that came directly through HUD. And each of those allocations have different rules and regulations that our staff have to learn, and they don't apply uniformly the same. And so we're quickly getting up to speed on spending those monies. Budgetarily, as we did our 5-year workout plan over the last couple of years, we shifted some of our funding. And so it really affected how we use social service funds today. And special assessments, snow removal, bus transit passes, those are examples of programs that we used to fund through HUD that we no longer can because of the oversight and reporting that's required. We weren't following some of those rules. And so instead of stopping those programs, we shifted them to social service funds as an allocation. And so for instance, we spend about $50,000 to $60,000 a year on annual special assessment reimbursements for those that qualify. Yeah.
Just a question in regards to some of this and how it relates to your staffing structure. Noticing that you're pretty heavy on the community development side. Is that because of COVID funding, or can you give us a historical perspective in regards to that staffing mix?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. It's really about the same. So before you had, Don Mayo. I'm going to forget people's names on the fly. Nate, Don Mayo, Willard. You had some key retirements over the years, and there's actually an allocation on the. So yeah, we're heavy on the community development side, but at any one time, they're managing about 15 to 20 to 25 projects when it comes to these allocations of funds. And so, for instance, the CLT is a recipient and Habitat is a recipient of funds. That requires weekly meetings with the recipients of the funds to track their projects and to track their reporting. We're getting ready to do some pretty significant closings, like the Milton Earl will close soon, and hopefully Elliott Place, maybe that's already closed, but as they get to the closing, Tia or staff members actually on weekly calls with the bankers to make sure all the paperwork aligns. So it's really heavy staffing commitment when we take on the HUD funds. That's probably the best way to explain it. A couple of things I just wanted to make sure we shifted as well is, and I'll say this a couple of times, is we stopped the housing rehab program and the storefront rehab. The housing rehab program that was federally funded was basically becoming, with the lead certification and the lack of contractors in our community, it just wasn't happening. The contractors aren't choosing to work in this work without some significant training. And all of these could probably have its own 1 hour brown bag. Storefront rehab, similarly, the owners and the contractors just were choosing not to follow the HUD regulations. And so it wasn't cost effective. And really the major blight on Broadway is done. And so that's another example of, if something was good, maybe at one point in time, to be able to fold those programs that no longer are applicable. So that was some of the work that the community development did over the last few years, is close some programs that no longer are probably relevant. So to your question, Commissioner Preston, community development has its own kind of category: urban development, current planning, and long-range planning. I'm going to talk all at once and group this work into land use. And so the main thing that Megan and our team do is focus on site plan permitting and zoning applications. Their whole goal is to take the long-range plans that we have adopted and apply them to the built environment through programs. That includes the Renaissance Zone, the Arts and Culture Commission, Board of Adjustment, things like that. Some activities they plan to take on this next year is getting a handle on our food carts, which is Section 18, and entertainment, the entertainment permits. And then downtown in focus, we'd like to do I'd like to be in front of you in a couple weeks or next week with a contract with Interface, the people that we used for downtown in focus, to do a review and refresh and kind of a scorecard now that it's been about 3 years. And I can dig into that some more. In long-range planning, this would be the vacant position that Aaron Nelson used to lead. Our priority is growth management, especially in our ET area, building our toolkit for land use management, and the goals for this next year are the LDC update RFP and the growth plan RFP. Current planning, this is Donald and his team. This is the one that you're probably most familiar with since you see him on a regular basis in terms of land development applications. But really, the main goals here is there are some process efficiencies that we continue to need to do. There's a team between planning, engineering, and inspections. There's a team that meets weekly as we review applications, and there's some steps that could be streamlined a little bit there, as well as succession planning is going to be really important as we look ahead in the future.
Nicole, we put some money in core neighborhood plan. Is that going to be somebody different that's going to be doing that?
Yeah, that'll be in the kind of in this long-range planning and in the urban development. So I'll dig in a little bit deeper here. So just a summary of the last couple of years. We've had success in the LDC diagnostic. You've given us the go-ahead to start embracing form-based code. And we're working on a follow-up operational plan that includes what Mayor just asked. We did a Renaissance Zone plan update. We oversaw the Mid-America Steel demolition and cleanup. We closed out a 4-year grant with the EPA Brownfields, conducted the 2020 census, historic overlays, and ET annexation strategies. And I'll come back to your question in just a minute, Mayor. In terms of when I was in front of you in 2019, one of the biggest sticky points that, to steal Commissioner Strand's question, if I had a magic wand, it would be to stop working with so many volunteers on a monthly basis. I love volunteers, but when we're trying to get operational strategy done, sometimes doesn't make a good fit. And so you gave me the clearance to go ahead and start to modernize a bit. And I'm happy to say we're making progress and strides. And with the Native American Commission, we've got 3 work groups that focus really in on housing, health, and community. We have Dr. Hogan on staff now and taking on the lead with the Human Relations Commission, now known as the Human Rights Commission. The Arts and Culture Commission now meets bi-monthly or every other month, and they focus on neighborhood development and capacity. We hire Reach Partners and the Arts Partnership to help us in some of the project management there. FYI, Fargo Youth Initiative meets as needed, and they really take on their own projects and conduct their own work. The survey is an example of that, where they had that idea, they took the lead, they did it, and then report back. So very little oversight there. The Community Development Committee, we meet quarterly now, and we're focusing on what I call the housing continuum. And then the Parking Commission, we really didn't meet at all last year. The day-to-day management is really handled now by interstate parking with some oversight by staff. And so the future of the Parking Commission is of question. And then the most important thing, I believe, is that we stopped sponsorships and events. And so most of these boards entertained sponsorship requests on a regular basis, and not something that was easy to do by any means. And so or questioned the role of the planning department in that. And so as such, the 2 events that we did keep as part of the Native American Commission work is Indigenous Peoples Day, and then in Human Relations Commission, this will be up to Dr. Hogan and the Human Rights Commission, but MLK Day and the Pride event. So that's kind of where we were and moving forward. And so what I'd like to spend the rest of the time is, I've got about 5 more minutes of really prioritizing the work, with Mayor's question. And I really see, 5 key initiatives, and really focusing on that red 20% of our time. How does the staff spend their time moving forward? So with land development, that would be your current planning, long-range planning, and urban development. Really, these 4 are our primary goals. And moving forward, I was going to walk through each of those initiatives, and then at the end have a list of all of the activities. And so in terms of priorities, the extraterritorial coordination, especially in protection to the FM diversion and utility planning, is probably the number one thing I spend my time on, or that gives me the most concern. Growth plan, RFP and selection, land development code, RFP and selection. As soon as we get Aaron's replacement, we'll be ready to move forward with that. Right now, Mark and I are working on it, but getting a full-time staff person to move those forwards. And then lastly, the return on investment model that we started a couple years ago or about a year ago. And we're in the training stages of it right now. We think it will be a good tool for us to use in terms of operationalizing. Right now, it's pretty complex, and so we're trying to break it down into a usable way that it makes sense for people communicating about it. As we get into housing, this will also be both community development and long-range planning. And really, we've kicked off a housing needs market analysis metro-wide. Fargo is leading that because we really need the information. And as part of the core neighborhood plan, we also see housing a new housing rehab program investment or development that's going to be public and private partnership. The engagement center, which we've talked a bit about, and then the code enforcement in neighborhoods, which is also the core neighborhood plan. So we really see these activities as activities that we want to learn more about, operationalize, and get kind of a group of people behind these in conversation. As we look to just departmental operations, we want to take more advantage of the technology we have available with some permitting automations and process improvements, coordination with engineering and utilities as we look in our future growth areas, especially when it comes to applications coming in as a request, making sure we're keeping up with what engineering's designing in utility management. And then succession planning and training is our 3 primary goals. And then as we look at public art, our primary goals, we just released a call for public art that's really meant to be neighborhood focused, but we've left it pretty open to see how the community response is going to be. We have on our work the panels on City Hall to redo those. I think those are in your 22 budget. Working with the administration team on that. Working with transit on bus wraps as an idea, and then a capital project, which would be ARPA funded, that we got almost ready to go live in 2020. It was literally March 2020. We were going to set out an RFP, and then we put it on hold, and we'd like to bring that project activity back. Downtown as a topic, focus area, we'd like to do, bring back interstate. So the downtown plan has actually been in place now for 4 years, believe it or not. And since then, we have a new city engineer. We have a whole new DCP team. We have all sorts of new RDO and new uses downtown. And so instead of starting over, we want to just do a refresh and recap and truly understand the community's capacity. And we have our current contract with interstate parking is due in 23. So we'll do a new RFP process. And then anybody that's been in our office or the police department or in the health department over the last 6 weeks knows that food carts have been a big struggle. And so we need to update our ordinance on that goal. So this list is everything that I just went through in an order of priority. And the ones in bold would be items that we would use consultants for or with. And the other items are more probably operational and staff, initiated or staff focused, if you will, 100% staff. And so I think I'll stop there to see if you have any questions as I kind of rattle off this list. This is just, Nicole and Mark putting them in priority list. But I think the main point I'm trying to make is we can't do all things at one time. And so as we try to, on a weekly basis, there's probably about 60 hours of staff time, 40 to 60 hours of staff time that we bounce between these topics. The rest of the time of our staff is spent on the day-to-day operations relating to management of the federal funds and management of permit applications.
There was a question by one of the residents about poverty and what we're doing for poverty in the community. And we are one of the cities that does have quite a bit in children that are in poverty. Is there a task force or something working on that?
There might be something with United Way, but in terms of being led by the planning department, I am not aware. I know it's a need. And as we look at that housing continuum and people that need housing, there's obviously a lot of mix in that poverty.
You had on your research needs poverty impact, so that's what I was trying to reference. It's your next slide, but
Yeah.
my assumption is somehow you're going to be involved with that. And I think the housing, we've been looking for that. I think Arlette, you and Dave at Metrocog that's doing that study on that, so that should help us focus, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yep. So there's a lot of questions we have from a staff level that we're not quite sure the chain of effects or the strategy that's happening at a community level. So it's beyond the planning department and it's beyond the city of Fargo. It's more like the region and the state even. And one of them is, basically who are all these people coming to town and where are they coming from and what do they need? There's a lot, the growth, we're one of the highest, fastest growing areas in the country. And so it's unique. And, what are the drivers? I'm guessing it's very diversified drivers. In terms of the current housing market needs, yes. Why are these houses so expensive? Why is the rate going up? And we, again, know what's happening on a nationwide level. We know what's happening somewhat at a local level, but how do we get more quantitative and qualitative data to help actually identify the problem we're trying to solve? Same with poverty impacts. We know housing affordability is literally calculated by 30% of your income. Anybody that is, kind of less than, I'm just going to say, I'm making up a number, anything that's less than 30 grand a month or year, 40 grand a year, is paying more than 30% of their income on housing. And so the federal definitions and the market definitions and the banking definitions of affordability aren't aligned to what is actually happening physically. And so these types of questions are things that people get PhDs on. So we're trying to get a handle of what the story is for our region and for our community.
If I could just ask a question, and then I'll make a comment about this one too. If you go back one slide, the code enforcement in neighborhoods, I'm always confused about the planning department's role versus inspections. Can you
Yeah,
clarify
that's
that?
a great question. So several of these items, item number 11, the code enforcement neighborhoods, that is, I would say, not the planning department by itself. And so code enforcement, the planning department, a few years ago, we reinstituted our code enforcement task force. And that has police, planning, engineering, inspections, health, probably legal, and about 6 or 7 groups. The planning department holds the meeting and holds the agenda space for those meetings and looks for collaboration and consensus building. Not all things need to come to the code enforcement task force, but more and more there's multiple items that transect many, like bed and breakfasts or Airbnbs, as an example. I think what I've started working with the administration on as it relates to the core neighborhood plan is how, kind of nudging my fellow department heads and department leaders, division leaders on if you were to be a more proactive code enforcement team, what do you need for resources? Or what do you need for tools? Or what do you need for codes? And so that's an example of a project where as a department, our department, we know how to convene people and ask questions and make reports and write it down and brainstorm with people. It'd be very much consensus building with my peers is the activity that I see, happening over the next year.
So as we're looking at this, I'm looking at it from the resource needed lens. And, this whole issue of code enforcement was certainly an issue that was addressed within the core neighborhood plan. And the ability to start influencing some of those homes, and oftentimes they're absentee landowners or absentee property owners. So it seems to me that, and, along with inspections, needing to put some resources into that area.
Yeah.
The second thing is, and the reason I asked the question about the community development staff, and I think the city-owned properties, the proposals that we're dealing with right now is starting to bring forward the whole issue of, and you touched on that, the housing for the working poor, that middle income or middle priced housing, the lower end of that. And a lot of those individuals are service industry, and, it's, working poor probably isn't the best terminology, but those that are on the lower end of the salary scale. And you and I have talked about this a little bit. The housing study, I think, will be a good overall kind of look at where the gaps are. But with those lower income scale kind of housing needs, we almost need to look at those in a microcosm, looking at them perhaps in more of a neighborhood kind of focus around employment centers, West Acres, downtown, wherever else that might be. So whether there's the ability within the current community development staff, and you said it requires a PhD, so maybe we're talking, again, outside help, but somehow figuring out with the CD committee what particular kinds of housing is needed in what parts of our community. So that would be another resource question.
Yeah.
Nicole, this is a great update, and thank you, and thanks to everybody in your department. A lot of times what we do is we look at the way we're doing things and wonder how can we tweak them. I'd like to back up. I just quite never understood, as I see your department, some of your focuses are things that I would wonder, how did they get into planning and the community development department? Like, arts and culture, Native American Commission, Human Relations Commission. These are, in my mind, if we were to look at a future changes, we would realign some of those activities to maybe go under administration, rather than under planning and community development. Am I off the deep end on that, or do you have thoughts on realignment so that when we do refocus, we're maybe sometimes changing the lane and the connectivity to the city, so they're better aligned? And I might, some of those departments and boards and commissions, I just don't know their best fit in your department, and we burden your people with things that aren't in their lanes, their skill sets, maybe.
No, I can appreciate that question, and I think you and I have talked about this. I would concur. There's some things that we're experts at, and then there's some things that we're good at, and comes to the planning department especially historically, when we talk about community building and communications and networking. Those are some of the soft skills that planners generally have. And when we were a town or a size of a city, 20 years ago, that was maybe a different answer than today. And it's really more about where you want to be in the future. And so if you imagine, like our public arts master plan indicates, let's just pretend it's a public arts goal. You've adopted the public arts master plan, and whether you realize it's in there or not, there is the goal of, I think, a $600,000 program that is managed. Mm-hmm. And so, we're not equipped to do that whatsoever. And so it's really about, if that is the true goal, then what does that need for staffing? What does that need for efficiency and things like that? And then some of these questions like Native American Commission or human relations or human rights, there's the metro-wide reach as well, and so, indigenous peoples' issues in Moorhead and Fargo and West Fargo are going to be, fundamentally some similar issues, and same with poverty, and same with other social community needs. And so, no, I would concur.
Nicole, what keeps you up at night? Besides our texts and messages at 10 at night, and you feel compelled to respond. But what do you lose sleep over that is hard to voice that we need to really be aware of?
Well, so next, I would say my next 3 slides are somewhat to that. And so the planning subject matters and the trends, there's a lot of things we just don't know. And so when I was a planner in school and land use planning and commercial land use needs, what that looked like in the 80s and 90s is going to look way different post-pandemic and, the big box retail and that kind of situation. So how land uses are needed and to lay on the land to keep the city's bottom line resource-wise, tax-wise, that's a question. So the ET management and drivers, the housing access, in terms of housing, in my mind, nobody's talking the same language. The orthodoxies of what we know, challenge that. So the findings, honestly, of the core neighborhood plan are somewhat different in terms of the solution and approach than I would have projected it to be. And so we, again, have a whole hour on just that. And so it's being open-minded. I think time management is what keeps me up at night. Not burning out, not having the staff burn out, department morale is probably what is good. We have a great team. I think moving forward, part of our issue is the conflicting priorities. 5 elected officials that the public elected have 5 different priorities and goals, and it's hard to build consensus around that. And so that's a reality that staff lives in, and I'm not about to try to change that. And so it's how do we make sure we really know what problem we're talking about, especially at the staff level, and so that we're just not what's the line that Bruce uses, ready, shoot, aim, And so it's so that means being transparent and being ready to make hard decisions. More and more, it's probably going to be split votes. Up at the 5, that's okay. Staff is lost, we're not necessarily striving for 5. Yeah, I would love 5 votes and consensus, but these are really hard decisions to make as we move forward. And then creating space for that dialogue and understanding. I'm really proud to say we got 5 votes at the core neighborhood plan adoption. And that took a lot of one-on-one meetings with you as a department head and general support. And so then really understanding the chain of effects that policy makes. I think for next steps on how to help with that, I don't like coming forward with problems without solutions. And so, I really want us to focus on making sure we know what problem we're trying to solve for. And that means qualitative and quantitative data. I really want us to remove buzzwords so we can talk about the problem. So I'm just going to pick on gentrification. I hate that word, gentrification, because it means people get PhDs on gentrification. So I don't have any trust when I hear from someone talking about gentrification. We're really actually talking about the same thing. And so I really want to make sure, what are we talking about? Are we talking about the fact that service workers can't live downtown? Are we talking about it needs inventory of available apartments? By the way, we've done inventory of available apartments for service workers, and they do exist. Do they meet the quality and standards that people want to live in? Maybe not. And so it's really, so tomorrow's meeting, this is maybe a plus for tomorrow's community development meeting, we're going to have a report from Maxfield Research on housing needs in downtown when it comes to affordable housing. We've just prioritized, at the staff level, we've prioritized, because nobody else is working on deep subsidy housing. Nobody. The market can take care of just about everything else. And so that is our department's goal. So deep subsidy housing means 0 income, means hard to house, means, less than 20% income. That is what we focus on, because nobody else focuses on that. Everybody else, that is someone else's issue. And so, so that's what we've elected to do strategically. If you want us to know more and do more at a broader level, we'll do it as part of these initiatives, but that's not something our department focuses on. And so, I look forward to more of these types of things. I'd love to have, mid-year update with you, or if there's certain topics you want to talk about in depth, be glad to have, I love the fact that we have open dialogue with you as staff. That's so helpful, and our administrators. And so, so that's kind of where we're at. And this is a bit of our department. We couldn't do it without the team. The team is amazing. I don't honestly know why they show up every day, but they do. And so one of the things they do for community building is they volunteered at Habitat, one of the houses they help fund. We had a great Christmas party in 2019. I think that was the last time we were able to do that. And with masks and all, is everybody in front of I think this was Luke's going away party. So, so that's a bit where we're at. Thanks for your time.
If I could,
Excellent update.
if I could say something, and this is not necessarily directed at the planning department, but probably more at the commission here, in that as housing is becoming more and more expensive, and people are getting locked out of, especially home ownership, you had indicated your focus is on the deep subsidized housing. I think that's going to expand over time and is going to start to include that lower end income scale kind of housing. So that's going to be a gradual change, I think, but it is coming, I think.
Yes, sure, Strand.
Thank you. Nicole, one time I was in a meeting with you and Mark and some of your staff, and I asked a question that I think's worth repeating because it was important to me. My question was, how much of these, you've got all these different strategic plans, Go 2030, neighborhoods and LDCs and so on. Then I asked, well, how much of that sits on the shelf? And I got a great explanation to me that it doesn't. If you could help us know how these strategic plans are really actually on a daily basis incorporated into your departments and the city's activities, that would be really valuable, I think, to one more time touch on.
Yeah, no, thanks for that question. We're very excited about our strategic plans, whether it's Go 2030, Downtown in Focus, Core Neighborhood Plan. Primarily, that means we know we're working with consensus, we know we're working with community vision, and we know we're working with goals and strategies that have been blessed by the elected officials. So just imagine if we didn't have those, I would be in front of you every day, all day long, asking for decisions on things. And so that's the best way I can explain that we use the plan. We use the plan day in, day out when it's, an application for zoning, an application for platting, working with engineering on their CIP plan, sitting there on the, the 2nd Street pedestrian bridge, or whether it's a 17th Avenue corridor or the soon-to-be 6th Avenue reconstruction that has some hard decisions to make because the Downtown in Focus plan says something different than what we're used to doing. And so we use the plan every day. And the problem is these plans are 20-year visions, and they have many different partners, not just the planning department, but they have the DCP, our partners here in the room, as well as our community leaders. And so it's the Fargo School District's plan, it's the planning department's plan, it's the city of Fargo's plan, it's the health department's plan. And so it's really about how do we internally talk about these things. And so I would say we use the plan every day, all day. Mark and I were joking that the core neighborhood plan isn't bound very well because mine's already splitting. And so we're literally taping the covers together.
Any other comment, Dave? Anything? No? I think the other challenge we have is the average income of people in West Fargo and Horace is higher than the average income in Fargo. So it almost appears the affordable housing question we're going to have to tackle and take on. The core neighborhoods are something we have to look at, 1,500 properties out there that need some help. So I think there's some challenges that we have throughout the community. But HUD also is going to come back into this, as far as I understand, Secretary, looking at how do we make affordable housing, or what do we do, or should we have a program? Is there something else we can do for those community members that need help or need a boost in some way? So the challenge is on you. I hope we can come up with some solutions, but excellent hour presentation. Appreciate it. And Tony, things have changed since you were there. See how much things continue to move forward. So thank you very much.
Can I ask, Nicole, did you get what you need from us?
I think so. If you don't like anything that I presented to you, please let me know. Because this is our work plan as we charge forward. I have some more, for those that want to know deeper dive. It's been kind of nice. I can look back to 2018 and start to put together things. We started a project list that we track internally. So now have some more information, and I was planning on putting together like an annual package of information to send to you. And if there's any types of metrics that you would like us to think about tracking, I think that's the question we start to have. Like, how do we know we're successful? There's the economic stuff that Jim does, but is there some other aspects of tracking that is meaningful to you? So I appreciate the dialogue.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for a great presentation, and thanks for your staff for being here today.